Welcome to Leaving the Lies and Telling Your Truths. Thank you for joining us today. This is a very special edition episode that we are going to be doing. We ask that you join our Facebook page, Leaving the Lies and Telling Your Truth. And we ask that you also like, share, and subscribe on our YouTube page so that we can get more knowledge out there. Today's episode is on addictions and how they relate to cults and abusive situations. How are you doing today, Mel?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. I'm going to start off by letting everyone know that we actually could not find a whole lot of information of exactly how abuse or addiction relates to being in a cult. I did find a couple of things, but there's not a lot of information out there, which is unfortunate because I think there is a direct correlation. But what we did instead was we used kind of our connection that we always talk about, where we think cults are very similar to an unhealthy or abusive relationship, and that is what we kind of used as our source and just kind of replaced the abusive relationship with the cult, because there's so much correlation there. So that is how we got our references and our resources for this episode.
Good. Sometimes people become stuck in cults for the same reason they suffer from addiction issues. Similar to abusive relationships, most people don't realize that they're getting involved in a cult until it is too late and they already feel trapped. One reason that people stay in a cult is because of something called trauma bonding, somewhat similar to Stockholm syndrome. People can actually become chemically dependent on the hormonal ups and downs that cults tend to put you through.
The intermittent positive aspects of the cult is usually just enough to keep a member hooked, at least for a time, which is very similar to an abusive relationship. You tend to seek out what you had in the beginning. And when you first join a cult, you feel a lot of that love and that strong bonding and connection with the people and the group. And you tend to get caught up in a kind of a game of cat and mouse where you're constantly being pulled back and forth, and you become very dependent on gaining the approval and the acceptance of the group so you can find that love and acceptance that you felt in the beginning. This can be very similar to being addicted to drugs or alcohol. Therefore, someone that may already be suffering from addiction type tendencies is much more likely to be attracted to a cult type environment.
People tend to stay in a cult for many of the same reasons they suffer from addictions. They get stuck in an unhealthy, toxic cycle because it becomes comfortable and familiar to them. Most people want to feel like they belong somewhere or just want to be something bigger than themselves. This can leave people vulnerable because it is an underlying natural desire within all of us. This is how so many people end up in cults and or abusive situations. Once you get once you get sucked into one, you feel like you're trapped, and it takes a great amount of mental and emotional effort to work your way out of this cycle.
People already suffering from addiction issues are even more vulnerable because they tend to feel more isolated from not only from society but possibly even from their family and friends. They may have already done things to damage the trust within those relationships, and some may have already been cut off from family and friends for that exact reason. And this then can lead them to find acceptance within that cult environment, and it gives them an opportunity to use that cult as their new family, as a replacement for their family.
Exactly. The same way people don't understand why others stay in an abusive relationship, they have trouble understanding why people stay in a cult. The reason is because they fall into a very familiar, what they think is a safe cycle. As unhealthy as it can be, it is very difficult to break free from this. As strange as this may sound, you actually become comfortable with the abuse and the dysfunction. It can feel very normal for the person who's going through it because they don't see themselves as deserving any more than what they're going through.
Absolutely, and they just become used to it.
Yes.
It becomes their new normal. This doesn't seem out of character. For those already struggling with substance abuse issues, they tend to have an unhealthy attachment style, and this can make them easy prey for a cult or an abusive person. They are more easy to take advantage of because they can be pulled into that unhealthy situation. Those who have left a cult tend to feel broken, and even if they didn't have addiction issues going out, they can develop those addiction issues. Going in, they can develop them coming out. It can be easier to develop that when they leave, because drugs and alcohol can become a way of coping with the guilt, the anxiety, and the depression that people tend to experience within a cult environment. And I am going to also add in here that not just drugs and alcohol, you can become addicted to work, you can become addicted to sexual behaviors, you can become addicted to the internet. There are all kinds of addictions out there that can replace that. And people who fall into these addictions, it is because there's usually something missing within themselves. They feel a large hole within their soul, and they begin to fill that hole with drugs, alcohol, work, internet, sexual behaviors, or even an abusive relationship. And that can make them feel like they're filling that empty space.
Mm-hmm. Now, some groups that help with recovery will say to find a spiritual fulfillment in order to fill that hole, which I agree with. However, tell this to somebody who is coming out of a spiritual cult. They're not going to want to do it.
Exactly, because they've already been spiritually taken advantage of, and they're going to feel like it's going to leave them certainly in a more vulnerable position.
And you've said it before, Mel. You liken it to spiritual rape.
I have.
And in a sense it is. So how do you tell somebody, well, look to your higher power, if when they were originally looking to their higher power and getting raped repeatedly, why would they want to do it again?
Absolutely. It's no different than if you walk down a dark alley and you were attacked, you're not going to want to walk down that dark alley again. You're going to be much more reserved, and you're going to want to protect yourself, which is just a human instinct. Some people also become addicted to these things because they feel that they don't have any self-worth. They feel a lot of guilt and shame about themselves and their actions, maybe things that they did in the cult, maybe things that they did when they first came out of the cult. And they try to cover these things up with drugs, alcohol, work, the internet, sexual behaviors, and this can put them in a never-ending spiral. And the feelings and the emotions from the cult that can add on top of that can add even more shame, because they're now feeling also the shame from their addictive behaviors, and this can lead them to feel guilty about that on top of what they're already feeling bad about after coming out.
Then, as they do get their lives together, whether months or even years later, the very people that they wanted to be around but they couldn't be around because they did have these addictions or they were in the cult, say to them, "Oh wow, I heard that you were drinking and drugging and having sex all the time." Or even speak of a certain situation while the said person was under the influence and laugh as they're speaking about it. Same likewise with sexual behaviors or abusive situations. All the while the person is thinking, why have I even struggled to become a better person? If the people that I care about, that I'm trying to become close to again, are still judging me, just like the people that I look to in the cult and or the abusive situation. So what when they come back from being or from overcoming their addiction, and it is an everyday struggle to overcome things, and plus you're overcoming your past, and someone goes, "Oh, do you remember that time?" You may think it's funny. That person, though, is dealing from the guilt and the shame of it. So all you're doing is piling onto it, becoming the very person or the people that were in the cult that were doing it to them in the beginning. So they would just be like, well, forget it, because you're judging me anyway. So why do I struggle? I might as well just do the addiction that makes me feel good.
Right. Absolutely. And that's why it's so important that we try to show people compassion and understanding, try to lift them up and give them encouragement. even if it's just
Yes.
a kind word to lift them up, because you never know what somebody is going through behind closed doors. You never know what's going on in the inside. So try to refrain from being judgmental or being critical, and offer instead uplifting and encouraging words.
Yes. Let's just think of it this way, Mel. You're at an amusement park and you get onto those spinning teacups. And at first the teacups are going really slow, but then it begins to go faster and faster. And the world is spinning around you out of control. You feel out of control and you can't get that cup to stop. So then you begin to get nauseous and a headache and a whole bunch of different emotions and feelings take over you. And then bam, it stops. And now you have to deal with the after effects of what just took place. And very often these people are having to deal with the after effects of this by themselves and alone. That is why it is so very, very important that we have compassion, like Mel was saying, uplifting, and even if it's just, hey, you're doing a good job, those words can mean the difference between somebody staying clean and sober, or having self-worth in themselves, or somebody slipping back into the addiction and then causing really real harm.
We're going to speak a little bit here on just kind of maybe some personal experience, but just kind of why we're doing this episode. It stemmed from some loss, and I'm going to let you start with that, Autumn, because we've had some real recent loss and some that's a little bit further back. But I'm going to let you start, and then I'm going to start. That's right, I'm going to start. Sorry. So I'm going to start with saying personally, I'm going to go back a little further. My dad passed away 3 years ago. It'll be 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago this December. So I'll start by saying my dad, when he joined the House of Yahweh, had been a recovered alcoholic for 12 years, had not drank a drop. We joined the House of Yahweh, and he was told there was no such thing as an alcoholic and that he could drink again, which for any alcoholic, he was pretty happy to hear that. He thought, oh, well, I don't have to worry about this anymore. This isn't going to be a burden on my back. He believed that Yahweh had taken that addiction away from him, and that was not a real thing. So my dad started drinking again. Now, my dad did attempt to quit drinking several times after we left the House of Yahweh. He drank quite a bit when we were there. I think he did try to keep it certainly under control as much as possible during the feast and things like that, because I think he didn't want to act out in front of people. But certainly when we left, he fell deeper into his drinking and really was on and off the wagon for years after that. Ultimately, my parents split up, with his addiction certainly contributing to that. My dad also actually suffered from a pretty serious internet addiction as well, and that certainly played a part in it. And when my mom left him, he really kind of went off the rails, for lack of a better word. Now, he was already on that path anyways, but I think my mom kind of reined him in a little bit, and he didn't have that anymore, and he kind of went out of control, so to speak. Till he ultimately died of a severe GI bleed due to drinking alcohol. I mean, by the end of my dad's life, he was drinking just under a half a gallon of vodka a day on a normal day, and eating very little food. Basically, he had become alcohol dependent, and that was by the time. This was like a 3-year process for him to get to that point of when he actually passed away, to the point where at this point, and this is hard to say, this is so hard to say, but our family was actually a little bit relieved that he was gone, because we didn't have to worry about him anymore, because every day was a worry. It was always worrying about, was he going to get hurt? Was he going to need to go to the hospital? Was he going to get sick again? Was he going to fall down? Were we going to find him dead, which ultimately I did. I found him, deceased in his home. And it was, it was a very, and honestly, that sounds like such a horrible thing to see, and I'm sure it is, but I just remember this great sense of peace coming over me, of just knowing and feeling that my Heavenly Father was telling me it's going to be okay. He's okay. You don't have to worry about him anymore. He's in my hands now. And that was, and I didn't have this sense of panic or anything. I looked over at him and I said, "You're gone, aren't you, Dad?" And I walked over and I kissed him, and I felt for a pulse. Even though I already knew, I did feel, and I really didn't know what to do at that point, because I had never found somebody that was deceased before. And instead of calling 911, which would be your normal reaction, I called my sister and I said, "Who do you call when you know someone's already gone? Because Dad's died." And she said, "You still have to call 911. Okay, I said, "Okay," because I didn't know. I had no idea. I'm like, "Yeah, you still." So they do still send the ambulance out. They do check his vitals, make sure that everything's okay. So that's one of my personal experiences within my family. And for myself, I'm going to say that between suffering from, I think, which was religious trauma syndrome, and also going through my divorce, I went through a stage where my self-esteem was quite low, and I felt pretty worthless. I felt like nobody was going to want to be with me because I was not only divorced, but I had a child. And I ended up in an abusive relationship. And during that abusive relationship, he was a heavy drinker, and I became a drinker at that point. Now, this was less than a year of my life. And basically, I kind of did exactly that. I spun out of control, and I managed to get myself back on track fairly quickly in comparison to a lot of people. But I do certainly know what that struggle can be like, and I know that not everybody is able to pull themselves out of that as easily as I was able to. I think I had a really good support system, and I got myself out of that particular environment and situation fairly quickly once I did start sobering up and realized really where I was and what was going on. And I know that coming out of the cult environment certainly contributed to that for me as well. So I guess I just wanted to share that with everyone, because if that can help someone out there who might be going through something similar, I'm willing to share some of my secrets, so to speak.
Mel, thank you for sharing that. I know that was probably very difficult for you, but to put a face to somebody who actually recovered and was able to go on and become the woman that you have, it will bring a lot of people hope. And thank you for exposing yourself like that. The House of Yahweh replaces addiction. Not just the House of Yahweh, a cult in general will replace addiction, because when you're in addiction, it's all or nothing. I'm in this all the way. I'm going to do it all the way. And when you get into an occult environment, it's all or nothing, because you cannot self-regulate. And it was told to us, and Melody and I believe this, that people tend to stay in their cult environment because they're scared if they leave, they will go back to their addictions, and they would rather have this cult life than having drugs, alcohol, sexual behaviors, or anything like that. It just feels safer to them. And
well, it's probably too more predictable.
Yes. I too went through my own struggles when I left. So I know that there is that this is very real, whether it's in a book or not. I don't need it to be in a book because we lived it. There are three names that I would like to say in remembrance and to speak a little thing about them, because these were great guys, and their lives ended too short. That is Luke. He passed away almost a month ago, I do believe. He was an amazing young man. I got the privilege of knowing him and his family. Him and his older sister got to stay with me for, I think it was about 2 months. Most parents had to go work. He was absolutely adorable. He had a beautiful little boy. He had succumbed to the addiction that he had, and his life ended, like I said, I think it's been about a month now. Orland Maratz succumbed to his addiction back in January. An amazing man, a father of two, a grandfather of two. I remember the first time I met Orland. He was this big, hunky Marine, always had a kind word, always had a smile. I remember watching him with their oldest daughter. He was just a lot of fun, and as I've mentioned in other episodes, whenever I would walk past his campsite, he would always say, "Got a brat, are you ready for it?" He was a good man. He truly was, and he left behind amazing children, and many people love him. And there is Samuel. Samuel was very young, as was Luke, but Samuel was very young, and he succumbed to his addictions because of what he had to deal with and the trauma he had to deal with being in the cult. Like I said, he was an amazing man. He left behind a family that loves him, holds him up. And the thing about this is that all of these men had families that were, and friends that were supporting them and loving them and trying to help them. But they were so lost in, most likely, the hurt, the pain, the guilt, shame, of what they had gone through or going through, that whether it be by accident or it was on purpose, I cannot say for any of them. Right. We lost them way too soon. And to Luke and Orland and Samuel's families, Melody and I would like to say we love you. We know that they were amazing men, and that they are often in our thoughts, as are you, and our prayers. Addiction is very scary and very real.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to add that as much as that affected us, because we both had emotional reactions to these losses, I can't imagine the loss and the hole and the emptiness that their families and their loved ones feel, because I'm sure it's only a fraction of what you and I felt. We've had emotional reactions, and we are somewhat removed from their current lives. So I certainly, our sympathy and our empathy and our prayers go out to their families for that loss.
And I would like to add, Mel, I really, 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 really want to stress to people that are watching this, it is very, very important that you do not judge anybody because of what you knew about them 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, however long ago. And situations that you may find funny, stop and think they may not find those situations so funny. We need to learn empathy, compassion, kindness, and love, and we need to build one another up.
And if you are suffering from addiction issues after leaving a cult or an abusive relationship, it's so important that you seek help. If not, you're likely to fall deeper and deeper into your addictions as a way of coping with your loss. Find counseling, therapy, support groups, or rehab. If you're too afraid to start there, at least start with reaching out to a sober friend or relative, someone that can help to lead you in the right direction. And we ask that you share this episode with anyone you think could benefit from it. And we want everyone to know that we're sending out love, and we want to see you heal, all of you heal, and begin to be and feel whole again. With that, we're going to end today. We thank you so much for watching. Again, please share this with anyone that you think could benefit. Bye.